Good evening, Warren. I am sending you an invite to speak, and you might see it scroll down on your screen. Just hit that, or you can hit your microphone, and it'll send an invite to me, and I can hit yes. Do you see that? It's down at the bottom of your phone to the left. There's a purple microphone. I'm sending an invite to speak one more time. Let's see, and you should see the invite pop up. Oh, there you go. So now you're on mute, and when you're ready to speak, you can just tap your microphone again and it'll unmute. And we can go ahead and get started. There you go.
Okay, great.
Welcome. This is the Evening Magic podcast, and we've got Warren Moore, who is a novelist, a writer, an academic. And because I mentioned he's an academic, and because of my followers, I want them to know he's a little L libertarian, not one of those other kind of academics. So, welcome
Uh,
to Evening Magic.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, Robert. And yeah, my usual joke is I used to be a large L libertarian until I met some of them. Um, but that was a long time ago. So
I understand that, and I think a lot of people were large L libertarians, and then they met them, and they're like, well, maybe." Um, so that's actually cool. Since we're on that subject, who's your favorite libertarian or classical liberal?
oh my gosh. Probably right now. It would probably be either Jonah Goldberg or maybe Kevin D. Williamson.
I don't know Kevin Williamson or Kevin D. Williamson, but I know Jonah
Yeah,
Goldberg.
yeah. Kevin also writes for the Dispatch. He used to be at he used to be at National Review and was worked for the Atlantic for like a day and a half, literally. But before the staff freaked out about some jokes, some kind of joking on the square. He's a very pro life individual, but yeah, he was trying for humorous exaggeration, and because we live in the era that we live in, people weren't willing to cut him the slack for that. So he got the boot from the Atlantic after, like I said, about a day and a half.
Uh,
But yeah, now he's at the Dispatch.
was his humor expressed on X, here on X, or was it elsewhere?
I believe it was elsewhere. I think it might have been on some kind of podcast or an interview or something.
Okay.
But yeah, he talks about it. His book, the smallest minority, which is about individuals, a line that, as he said, he stole back from Ayn Rand. Um, yeah, he talks some about it there, and talks about social pressure and cancellations and things like that. But he's a really super bright guy, and he also gained some notoriety some years ago when he was at, I can't remember if it was a classical concert or a Broadway show, and somebody was using their cell phone. And after he asked them politely not to do it, and they, blew him off, he grabbed it and threw it against the wall and smashed it. So, he's an interesting cat.
So not quite libertarian. There's
Well,
a
yeah,
little bit of authoritarianism in there.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't like he was asking an usher to throw the person out. So,
Oh, yeah, took it in his own hands. It was
that's right.
a,
Vigilante libertarian, yes.
a ground root situation. But on the other hand, if the other person's phone was distracting him from hearing whatever he was going to hear or see whatever he was going to see, I forget what you said he was doing, then
Violates
they
the non-aggression principle.
right, and they're interfering with his freedom to hear what he wants to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Because people always like to protest and say you don't have a right to be heard. People have a right to listen, though, and you're preventing the
Yeah,
people from listening.
yeah. That's exactly the problem with a lot of things. Yeah, Kevin actually describes himself as, and I'm quoting here, an anarcho-capitalist with a fondness for Eisenhower. So he's got a sense of humor about the whole thing, anyway.
And you kind of have to. And it's very hard to label a human and have that label be the same thing, you know, years ago as it is now. I know that I'm going to be 40 this year, and there are things that I, even objects that I look for that I remember as a kid. For instance, small metal shoehorns that you used to get for free when you got a pair of
Right.
dress loafers. Now you can't get a shoehorn unless it's for a boot. And I was in
Hmm.
a shoe store and I found a shoehorn that's probably um, from the my wrist to the middle to the tip of my middle finger. That's how big it is. So it was the smallest one I could get. But I was
Hmm.
trying to describe it to this person who was 20 years old. I said, they used to be this big. It was only 30 years ago.
Right.
And but
You
things
know,
change.
it's funny you mentioned that. My father, for most of my childhood, my dad was a data professional at Genesco in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah, and among other things, Genesco owned like Jarman shoes and Kenny shoes, and Genesco actually stood for General Shoe Company. But
Hmm.
I had when I was a kid, I had more shoehorns than I knew what to do with. They were all over the place, and yeah, I I honestly hadn't seen one in years. Um, I actually I got a set of sneakers over Christmas, and it's almost like the shoehorn is built in at the back. That they're like Hoka running shoes. Although if you ever see me running, you'd probably better run too because that means something large is chasing us. But but yeah, it's in some cases for like regular shoes, it's almost like they're built into it now.
I also got a pair of Hoka running shoes around Christmas time.
Yeah, I fell in love with Hoka's a few years ago when I started walking fairly regularly, and I just really discovered that they're terrific, and so that's they have become a standard part of my wardrobe. So
I agree. I have not been paid for by Hoka to advertise with them, but they are great, and I think they're great. And I walk in them because I like to do a lot of steps.
hmm
I just recently, as far as this week, decided I'm not going to do so many steps. I'm just going to go for 30 minutes, and I usually do 30 minutes twice a day because once is with my dog.
hmm
But the Hoka is amazing
yeah.
because the rest of the time I wear sneakers for style, and a Van is gonna hurt my knee if I do 10,000 steps in it.
Oh
Also,
sure.
the Vans is what I needed the shoe horn for.
Oh okay.
It was
I've
too hard
got
to get them on.
I've got a set of Vans that they were or I don't know if they're true Vans or if they're Van clones, but they're done. They've got the Crimson Ghost from the Misfits on them. Yeah, the punk rock band. Their sort of mascot. They're set up like that.
Oh,
I
that's
wear them
cool.
occasionally. Yeah,
Oh, that's cool. Well, tennis shoes are really the best shoe for the corporate communist takeover when we have to work all the time. We're going to
yeah.
need comfortable stuff. And did you hear also that wardrobes have not changed since 2004?
Actually, I think I did read that somewhere not long ago. That
Yeah,
yeah, things that from a fashion standpoint, things have kind of hit a stasis level.
right. And they say if we watch The Office, it doesn't seem dated because they wear the same clothes that we're wearing now and it's 20 years old.
Right. Yeah, as opposed to say, something like Barney Miller, which my 1970s show that my I watched a lot of Barney Miller because my mother had a crush on Hal Linden, who played the title role, and yeah, you've got ties there that you could pretty much land aircraft on. So
And even in the 90s, everybody had that hobo chic look and they had like a lot of baggy clothing and a lot of layers and hats.
mhm,
At the beginning of Friends, they look completely different than the way they look at the end of Friends. And
right,
the end of Friends, they look like we do
yeah,
now. I heard the reason for that was because people sell to Walmart. Walmart started selling clothes. So if fashion doesn't sell 100,000 units, it's dead. So you have to make fashion that'll sell 100,000 units.
that makes sense, and in some ways that kind of connects to what I think has happened in the publishing industry. I mean, for decades they were talking about the coming death of the mid-list book, and that there's been it seems to be becoming truer all the time that you have these super monster bestsellers, then you've got the small fry like me, publishing in, typically in the indie press or things like that. And there doesn't really, so yeah, either you've got to move like monster units, or or you're going to just kind of be running what amounts to a storefront, of your own, and there's not much in the middle anymore.
I will give this reframe that might help.
Okay.
Matthew Turbyville, who used to run a book blog,
Hmm.
told me, he lives in Lake City, so we hang out sometimes. He said, because I was like, I'm writing literary, I'm writing indie or something. He said, everything you're writing is commercial.
Hmm.
So everything that we're writing is for, to get money from it. And there might be, we might not all be Colleen Hoover,
Hmm.
but, the market can change. And
Oh
what we
yeah.
have done is produce something commercial.
Oh yeah. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it, if you're not writing for the trunk, you're writing for some kind of an audience, and typically, you hope, or maybe if you're doing fan fiction or something, but typically you hope that somebody's going to want to be a patron, not necessarily in the Patreon sense, but in the sense that, okay, I like this, I'm willing to pay money to read more of it or hear more of it or something like that.
Right. Or they just start following. We talked about this a little bit Saturday. People start following their favorites on
Hmm.
social media. And if you have a favorite that's willing to put out some content for you, for instance, you have a blog.
Yes.
What's the name of the blog? How can people find it?
It's Professor Mondo, and you can find it at profmondo.wordpress.com. That's Profmondo, PROFMONDO, just like the here in my Twitter handle, which I've got that in quotes in the middle of my name, so it's Warren Profmondo Moore.
Excellent. And I have found a coziness and being able to find content from authors that I like. And I've finished their book in the middle of the night and they don't have something to download on Kindle and I want to see what else they've done. I've Googled Donna Tartt short stories
Uh
and I
huh.
found one about a garter snake. And I found comfort in reading your blog. I was going through the post and you have a lot of content out there. And I noticed that you changed the names of towns. Is that for anonymity or is it just for fun?
Well, it started as the first and became the second. I started the blog in 2010, and you know, at that point, well, for one thing, I didn't expect it to last very long. I'm not the best at sticking with things a lot of the time, and so I figured it would be like many of these things, and run for a few days and then go away. And I kind of adopted the character of Professor Mondo. Mondo is an old nickname from my late high school and college years, that has to do with the fact that I'm a big guy. Um, and yeah, I started it anonymously, uh, under the pseudonym, and to kind of maintain that, I refer to Newberry, the city I live in, as Mondoville, and Columbia, South Carolina, as Real City, and that sort of thing. After after a few months, though, some of my writing, some of the blog posts I wrote, got picked up by larger blogs and kind of online zines and stuff like that. And somewhere along the line, the yeah the mask was taken off. So as much as anything now, I kind of, I'll kind of talk about Mondo in like the third person. I actually, years ago, wrote an entry on in which the prof considers himself as a rhetorical mode. So um, these days there are people who call me Mondo, and but no, I've been out of that particular guise for most of the run of the blog.
How many subscribers do you have to the blog?
I honestly don't know. Again, that has to do with the origin of it. In 2009, my brother, my only sibling, murdered my mother and father, and well, his mother and father, our mother and father, and as you might expect, that that damaged me a lot. And I, I was just kind of, I started the blog as much as anything as a sort of distraction from the horrible stuff that was going on in my life. And so, writing was something I could do that occupied my mind and kept me from, thinking about terrible things. And so, I've always kind of viewed it as an end in itself. If it does turn people onto the work, that's cool. And obviously, I'll be happy if it happens. But in a lot of senses, it's still very very much kind of, well, it's an amateur effort in the sense that the word amateur comes from the Latin word for love, and it's something that you do for the love of it. So I've had offers to monetize the blog before. People wanting to do guest posts and pay me for it and stuff like that. And I haven't really done that because again, it's just you know it's something that, not thinking of it commercially, kind of. I mean, yeah, okay. Like I said, if people discover the work, that's great. But for me, it's more like, you know, I find it more freeing not to worry about it that way. It's kind of like, I play drums. I've been playing since I was about 13 years old, and I spent part of my first trip through grad school playing in a band, trying to become a rock and roll star, which didn't happen. And after a while, I kind of realized that in a lot of ways I was already too old and didn't have the right look to to be a career musician of that sort. And instead of getting depressed and bagging it, I just thought, okay, that means that I'm free to do what I want to do. And if it makes money, that's a happy accident. If it doesn't make money, at least I'm doing the stuff I want to do. And
Smart.
yeah, exactly. And so, I just kind of walked away with that. I've continued to play in bands over the years. When I've had bands that occasionally would get to, well, why don't we do this kind of music because we're more likely to get gigs? I've walked away from groups because I didn't like the stuff they wanted to do. Yeah, it might have gotten us more shows, it might have gotten us more money, but it wasn't the stuff I wanted to play. And it's kind of the same way with my writing. That um, I, I write it, and if people dig it, that's great. If they don't dig it, at least I'm writing the stuff that I want to write.
Oh, that's very cool. And I used to think, what if I had a big enough Twitter that I could be an influencer? Or what if I could get tips or something like that? And then I decided, no, I should just have fun with it.
Right.
Um, because it's too much pressure to come up with, content that you've got, that you've wrapped around your head some weird way. Because I've seen people that have, 100 times more followers than I have,
Hmm.
and now they don't get the engagement. On their, so they might get 10 likes on a tweet, and it's like, dude, you've got 15,000 followers. You only got 10 likes on it because they have to have a take, or they have to, whatever. And
Yeah, the beast has
I
got to get fed.
Right. And that's not fun. And so, if I can just have fun and have fun with everybody, which is what I do, I can get 10 likes on a tweet. And I
Right.
have, you know, just a small percentage of that following, but it's because people care and I care about them. And it's fun. I meet them in real life. And sometimes they become followers after I meet them in real life, like you and the Paul Leslie Hour, which is a podcast in Charleston.
Uh huh.
So, it's just a fun thing to do. Going back to the start of this conversation about National Review, did you know that Joan Didion used to do the film reviews for National Review?
Oh yeah, and John Dos Passos wrote for him for a while too.
Oh, I didn't know who that was. I don't know who that is.
Uh, he he was one of the great American writers of like the 20s and 30s.
Mm.
Um, wrote the USA trilogy most famously, and he, like like a lot of the kind of first generation of modern conservatives post World War II. He was one of those people who had been part of the left, and then after Stalin and all that sort of thing, moved away from it. And so he's a major American author, but he is no longer a particularly fashionable American author, and that actually started to happen during his lifetime. And a lot of people would argue it was because he kind of turned away from acceptable artistic politics, I guess would be
Hmm.
the way to put it. But yeah, he did some writing. He did some writing for National Review. Um, one of my favorite rhetoricians. Yes, that's how geeky I am. I had favorite rhetoricians. Um, Richard M. Weaver was instrumental in the founding of NR as well. Um, he he checked out very early. He died in like 62,
Mm.
but yeah, he was at one point. Wilmore Kendall referred to him as the captain of the conservative team, and this was like in the 50s. Um, you know, that's actually how I kind of met Jonah Goldberg. I was writing a paper on Weaver during my second trip through grad school, and I wanted to get some more information. So I emailed Jonah at NR back then, or NRO, and he put me on the track of George Nash's history of the conservative intellectual movement in America, and that was where I kind of discovered some stuff about Weaver and went from that to reading about his rhetorical thought and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's really cool. That's an interesting story. So your the how many books do you have published?
I have one book that is all mine. That is Broken Glass Waltzes. However, in since about 2013, I've published a couple of dozen stories um, in a variety of periodicals and anthologies. The I kind of got rolling with that around 2014, 2015, when Lawrence Block, the Grandmaster Mystery Writers of America, for my money, probably the America's greatest living crime writer. He and I had met through some school stuff a few years before, and he was putting together an anthology where all the stories had to take place in New York City, and he asked me if I might have something. And as it turned out, I did, and it ran. And there was a story called Bowery Station, 3:15 a.m., and it wound up being named one of the kind of honorable mention stories in Best American Mystery Stories, Otto Penzler's annual collection. So I kind of took it from there. But I've now been in I think it's seven of Lawrence's anthologies, and I've last year I had one come out in Black as the Night, which is a an anthology that Maxim Jakubowski edited, and it's stories that are inspired by the works or the life of Cornell Woolrich. And so I wrote a story set in Cincinnati in the 1930s, and kind of based it on Woolrich and his life, and you know that seemed to do pretty well too.
So
But
you write
yeah,
crime.
mostly. Um, a lot of people have said that I seem to kind of straddle a line between crime fiction, but yeah, I have people say, you know, this could run in a literary publication as well, and I'm fine with that. I'm I think of myself as a crime writer. I'm a member of Mystery Writers of America. Um, but again, I write what I write, and I can, and other people can figure out, can sort of type it thereafter. The one thing that I do object to is when, if I'm writing something that's a crime story or whatever, and people talk about, well, I'm okay with genre fiction as long as it transcends the genre, which I just think that's rampant snobbery, and you know ultimately it's kind of like there's a line that's been attributed to Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, several other kind of wonderful jazz musicians, when they ask about this type of music or that type of music, and the response is, well, there are really only two kinds of music: there's good and there's bad. And that's kind of how I am about writing too. Okay, is this a crime story? Well, it's a story, and yeah, a lot of my work has people who do horrible things to other people in it, but I'm just telling whatever stories happen to come to me, and I'll let somebody else worry about, is this literary? Is it mainstream? Is it crime? My very early work, back my first trip through grad school, was science fiction, but even then it was closer to like urban fantasy. So
That's interesting that you said whatever story comes to you. Do
yeah,
you feel so you don't do you think of well, if you have the we have different writing communities, and if you have the academics would turn their nose up at the ones that are doing NaNoWriMo.
yeah,
Um, and with the people that do NaNoWriMo, they put themselves in the categories of plotters and pantsers.
I am definitely a pantser.
Okay, yeah, I'm definitely a pantser also. When I went to MFA school,
Hmm.
everyone, all the professors claimed they didn't know what the difference was between the two, and they were all pantsers.
Hmm.
Which I thought, oh, that's interesting. These groups are not crossing over. Um, but oh, that's interesting. So when it's coming to you,
Hmm.
well, like when I write and I'm pantsing, I feel like I'm just telling a story to a little kid. Because when you do it to a little kid, you always have to come up with something. You can't just stop.
Right.
And that's what I feel. And I've done a lot of research, and some people feel like they're channeling. What do you think is happening when you're making a story?
Well, it varies from story to story, really. Sometimes I start with a voice. Sometimes I come up with, an idea that I can work as a hook. Sometimes I might just have a line that resonates, and and I can build stuff off that. In the case of the novel Broken Glass Waltzes, um, I I was driving around Lexington, Kentucky one night in the early '90s, listening to the kind of music that parents warn their children not to listen to. I mentioned them already, actually, the Misfits, the horror punk band out of New Jersey. And I was listening to their song that Metallica would go on and cover, a song called Die, Die, My Darling. And as I'm driving around, all of a sudden, the um, what becomes the 10th chapter of the book kind of pops into my head. So I drove home, got on the computer, banged out that chapter, um, gave it the working title, Die, Die, My Darling, until I found out like the next day that, as was typical for the Misfits, a lot of their songs were inspired by kind of grade B to grade Z horror movies from the 50s and 60s. And so I thought, okay, I've got to have I need a different title than that. And eventually came up with Broken Glass Waltzes. But I wrote chapter 10 first. And then I kind of had to figure out, okay, how did I get there? So I had to go back and take care of that. Somewhere in the process, I realized what I wanted the last line of the book to be. And so I was able to write the final scene. And then again, I had to go back and fill up everything from, basically write the second half of the book to get from chapter 10 to that last line that I wanted. Um, and it really kind of varies from story to story, though. Like I said, some stories I write because I can hear a certain voice. For example, a story of mine called Frankie that ran in the program for NoirCon in 2016, and I believe you can find it now on their website. Which, if you do a search for Frankie at Retreats from Oblivion, which is the title of their blog, you can probably find it there. But yeah, I I had originally written that somebody had wanted to collect some stories about Florida Man, right? And I I got a Florida Man voice and was able to write the story from there. Other times, it just there's a story I wrote that a lot of people seem to like, that was called Just So Story, and it was it was a story about hitchhikers and the people who pick them up. Um, you know, it just it kind of varies, just however it comes to me.
That's interesting. Do you write every day, or do you have any kind of schedule on yourself, or do you just do it for the fun of it and it happens to be every day? Or do you
Um,
not write every day?
I don't write every day, particularly right now, because as you mentioned earlier, I'm an academic, and that was this particular academic year. I happen to be chairman of the humanities department here at Newberry College, which means that I'm the chairman of English, Spanish, religion, and history, and that that they're it's not really any particular one huge thing, but just for example, I've spent a lot of time this week trying to make sure that we have people scheduled to teach all the freshman classes in English, because one of our incoming faculty members is stuck having visa problems halfway around the world, so we've got to find somebody to cover his classes and so on and so forth. But you know, I tell people that it's basically like being nibbled to death by ducks, and it's hard to kind of create enough of a clear headspace to to write well. I used to write every day in the early years of the blog, although usually what I was writing were blog entries. And I did that every day, but that was as much because of the therapy aspect of it as anything. As far as the more kind of creative work, um, I do it whenever I can steal the time and steal the headspace to do it. Broken Glass Waltzes, I wrote a lot of that. In between my bouts of grad school, I was a magazine editor for 6 years. And on days when my boss wasn't there, I would steal the day and spend it working on the novel. Um, these days,
Understandable.
yeah,
And I feel bad for any employer, including mine, who employs a writer because you know
yeah,
stealing the day. I have written there's a book review that I wrote on. It's called, oh well, I can't remember the name of the blog. Faded Shaded Fashion or Shade of Fashion is a famous French fashion blog that Albert edits. And Laura Albert wrote the book Sarah, and Sarah, um, she wrote it under a pseudonym, but she didn't just treat it as a pseudonym. She tried to like trick people into thinking that there was an actual author with the pseudonym, and it
yeah.
blew up. Do you remember the scandal?
I think so. Yeah, and it turned out that she was really three raccoons in a trench coat. But yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And I'm when I am I'm quoting the movie, and the movie stars Laura Dern. I love Laura Dern,
Hmm.
but in the movie, I'm sure it's probably a little bit different the way that she would describe it. But um, anyway, yeah. So anyway, she edits for the blog, and she and I are mutuals on here, and she helped me get it published. And
Hmm.
I wrote that entire thing a day before I went to Santa Fe. So it was my last day at work. And
Hmm.
usually it was like a grind in the middle of the summer. And I just wrote that thing all day long. And I'm into customer service, you know. It's
Right.
so, and I sent it off. And there are things about it that I would change now because when you're writing in between customers, it's not quite what you want. But
Hmm.
at the time, my work wife at the time, she's now my work ex-wife. She
Hmm.
got up and moved her stuff one day, but she just let me do it. I was like, "Hey, I'm not going to do much work today because I'm going to be writing this book review. It's for Towel. It's very important." And so that's what I did. And oh well, that's what happens. And I can't tell you how many times I've edited for Raleigh Review in
Hmm.
between customers at the DMV. Excuse me. They'll, I'm just a reader, so I just have to say no,
Right.
and I'll take some time to say no. And that's kind of a fun thing to do. It's a quick turnaround. It's fun to see what people are out there doing. A lot of the times, though, when I do see yes, then I have to read the whole thing, and that
Right.
can get in the way of work. And I send that off to the boss, and they never say. I send it to my boss at Raleigh Review, and they never like anything that I say yes to. But there's a couple of yeses each time we do an issue, and those I always have to read the whole thing, and then I look to the person's social media to see what else they've written,
Uh-huh.
and it always entertain myself that way.
Yeah. I can think of one story that I wrote called Slow News Day. Um, I actually wrote that while I was giving two different final exams. I wrote the first half during one of the exams, and I wrote the second half later that day, and the when I was giving another exam. While the kids are all were writing about Samuel Johnson or whatever. I just I had the time, and I had my computer, so I went ahead and wrote this story, and it wound up. It wound up being published in an online magazine called Spine Tingler. I don't know if it's still out there anymore because those things kind of come and go. But no, I totally get what you're talking about. It's also interesting, you're talking about being a reader. My friend Lawrence Block kind of got his start at the Scott Meredith Literary Agency, which is a notorious place. That they were one of the top agencies for genre fiction in the 50s and 60s and thereafter. But that's not really how they made their money. They made their money, and Larry's talked about this, so it's not like I'm telling any secrets. Um, they made their money by charging reading fees, and
Hmm.
Larry's first job in the business, he was like 18, 19 years old. He was going to Antioch and doing co-op work in New York, and he was basically a slush pile reader, and his job was to read this terrible fiction, send them letters explaining why the fiction wouldn't work, and they were all variations on a kind of form letter, and say, well, we can't do anything with this story, but we'd love to see another one with another however much reading fee.
Hmm.
And,
Let me
and
get on that.
yeah, and people people went for it then. People go for it now. I don't think I think SMLA has been bought out by somebody by now. I don't honestly know. But yeah, Larry kind of said, one of the things that did for him was he got to spend a great deal of time reading very bad fiction. And he said, you can learn so much that way because if you're reading excellent fiction, it's sometimes kind of hard to see the brushstrokes, right? He said it's much easier to figure out what somebody's doing wrong than figure out why everything's so wonderful.
Right, you're exactly right. Because when it's wonderful, it has, it's designed to make it look effortless.
Yeah.
The book I mentioned a book that I was reading, and there were lots of problems with it. I didn't get into it there, but I'm gonna get into it here.
Mhm.
It's got a non-binary character,
Okay.
and they're using they them pronouns,
Uh huh.
and that's very confusing.
Yeah.
And they also, even though they're trying to make it singular, and as an English teacher,
Hmm.
I would get in so much trouble saying there because it's natural to say everyone needs to get there, blah blah blah.
Right.
But I trained myself out of it.
Hmm.
Now there's no such thing as themselves when they're they them. It's
Right.
themself.
Yeah.
So now,
It's kind of funny because I'm a I'm 58, so I'm about a generation ahead of you, and you know it has, but it is very difficult for me because Mrs. Twyman, my ninth grade teacher back in 1979 or 1980, would have had a conniption about singular they. Now, in point of fact, singular they has been in use. You can find it. You can find incidences of singular they being used in Chaucer. Okay, so it's not like it's entirely a new
hmm,
thing, and it was used back then, kind not in a non-binary necessarily way, but in a way where if you were talking about someone of you know some random person of indeterminate gender, I guess, and it was Chaucer was using they that way. It's still it resonates funny for me when I read it. And again, I had I've had non-binary students who use they that way, and I've told them, yeah, this I'm always going to stop. It's always going to jar me out of the writing, but that's not a you problem. That's a Dr. Moore problem.
right. And one of the things, and I've heard different arguments, like you don't get your own adjectives. Why do you get your own pronouns? The first I was reading it, I was got maybe 30 pages in, and I was just, I annotate my books because I might want to leave them to the archives one day. It'll be fun to see all the things that I wrote.
Okay.
And but I was really dragging it too much, and then I couldn't focus on the story. And I do think that they did not edit it as closely as they should have because they were afraid of offending the author.
Okay.
And the author is a woman, and she identifies as a woman, at least for now. And so there were things in the writing that it was really clunky. A lot of passive stuff.
Yeah.
It's really hard to read. Like maybe the main character is pulling stuff out of her bag, and it'll say like the dishes were laid out, the chairs were laid out,
Hmm.
instead of the character actively doing it. So lots of problems like that make it even more difficult to read.
Yeah.
But I pressed on with it because I'm open minded,
Hmm.
and I wanted to give it a shot. And you have to really um, go with it. And I noticed that as I was reading the main character, I was reading it as a female, and the character also has sex with people,
Okay.
but they won't give us details. And one of the things about the non-binary is you should not be concerned with what's in our pants. But this book is the characters having sex, and so now I definitely want to know what's in their pants.
Right.
And the name of the book is the Psalm for the Wild Built by
Okay.
Becky Chambers. Just in case you're curious, it's a novella, so it's an easy read.
Okay.
So the main character goes off on a quest and encounters a robot. And
Okay.
the robot has pronouns of it.
All
It
right.
does not state its pronouns, but it referred to itself as an it. And the main character was very shocked. And the robot was kind of based in terms of pronouns are a human thing, and it just gave a lot of other interesting insights that kind of woke up the protagonist. So I don't know what's going to happen,
Hmm.
but it's not as preachy as I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
And there are moments, and I've underlined it, that are very beautifully written. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. And I have come to find out since it's a new genre of science fiction called cozy sci-fi.
Huh.
So it's nothing really dramatic. It's just like the monk, the main character, whose name is Dex, is a tea monk named Sibling Dex, and he learns how to make tea.
Okay.
And and that's what it's about. But there's a whole group of people on social media that talk about how much they love tea, how much they love being cozy. I see them on TikTok. So
Hmm.
I kind of it's a callback to that. I think it's kind of interesting. But as I read the robot, and I realized as I was talking, I go back and forth with pronouns about Dex.
Yeah.
It depends on the situation, what the character is doing. The
Sure.
robot, I read as a man, but then sometimes I read as a woman.
Hmm.
It seems, and I don't know if that's intentional or if it's a mistake. I can't tell because it's not edited enough.
Right.
But I'm like, oh, that's so interesting because we have Rosie, from the Jetsons,
Sure.
and I saw Ex Machina, and that was all women robots.
Hmm.
And we had Terminator, but the robot isn't killing anything. So it's kind of maybe like C3PO,
Hmm.
like an effeminate robot is probably what he is. But I just think that's kind of an interesting thing. I just wanted to share.
Oh, one that you might be interested in. Then this one's older. I think I'm pretty sure it dates back to the '70s or maybe the early '80s. Um, a book called "The Silver Medal Lover" by Tanith Lee, and it's about a young woman who falls in love with a robot, and it's it's a pretty interesting book. A friend of mine many years ago, it was her favorite book, and I happened to find it on my dad's bookshelves because my dad was a huge science fiction reader. I'm actually third generation science fiction reader. My daughter's fourth gen, and we so I had a lot of exposure to all that sort of thing, and yeah, you might, like I said, you might find that book fairly interesting, The Silver Medal Lover. Um,
Um, did the robot have a penis?
yes,
Oh, see, that's the stuff that we want to know.
yeah, he's a musician,
Okay. All right. So
so
I guess the protagonist ended up playing not the skin flute this time,
Oh,
but the but an actual trombone maybe.
womp womp. Yeah, there we go. Um,
You, have you ever heard of the writer Patricia Powell?
I've heard the
She's
name, but I
Jamaican.
okay.
Well, she's Jamaican. And she wrote a transgender book before it was popular. So I think she wrote it in the late 90s. It
Hmm.
was called The Pagoda. And it's about the Chinese that lived in Jamaica
Right.
in the late 1800s. And the book is beautifully written. I was taking breaks from the book to Google pictures of Jamaica in the late 1800s so I
Right.
could see the plantations. The main character is Mr. Lee, and we find out through the course of the book. I'm not spoiling it because you read it for the beauty.
Right.
We find out that Mr. Lee is actually a woman who disguised himself as a man
Hmm.
who, because he had been raped and had a daughter, and he wanted to protect himself,
Hmm.
and he decides he no longer has to protect himself because one, his rapist died, and two, someone burned down his store, so then he was building a pagoda instead, and he allowed his hair to grow. He was didn't bind his breasts anymore,
Hmm.
and the book still referred to him as Mr. Lee, and the book still referred to him as he. And I do it now, and that was a mind bend, and it was genius the way that she did it.
Okay.
And I recommend it. It's one of my favorite books ever. The Pagoda. It's not science fiction or anything,
Right.
but it's very cool.
I don't read nearly as much SF as I used to. I like I said, I you know grew up reading a ton of it. Mainly stuff from the '60s and '70s because well, I was born in '65, and I was so I was my dad was getting science fiction book club stuff every month, and he also had my dad had a book a day Jones pretty much all his life, and so I was always just reading whatever was around. And yeah, like I said, the first fiction writing I did for publication was for a science fiction magazine in Lexington, Kentucky, called Low Orbit. Um, someone that I knew from undergrad had become the editor of this thing, and I took a look at a few issues and kind of thought, yeah, okay, I can probably do as well or not, if not better than this. It was it was the kind of stuff that I could see myself writing, and so I did, and the Low Orbit started picking them up and publishing them, and so I did a lot of that through my first trip through grad school.
Okay, that's interesting. We have a listener. I invited him to speak. It's not Jeb.
Right.
Um,
I'm not
d-
Jeb.
d- yeah. So maybe he'll take it. I'll invite him again to see. Maybe he wants to ask you something.
Okay.
I'll do it a couple more times and talk that way. When this goes to YouTube, it won't be boring for whoever is listening to it.
Okay.
I'll
Sounds
just
good.
keep on. So I'll just talk a little bit. Um, Scott Adams, who draws Dilbert, he does a
Right.
podcast every day. He uses the term reframe, and I said reframe earlier,
Uh huh.
so I just want to give him credit and give him a shout out. It's a really interesting podcast. If you haven't listened to it,
No, no, I haven't. I do read the comic strip occasionally, and I've I've read I've read a few of his articles and stuff like that other places, but you know honestly, most of the time, whatever I'm listening to is usually music. So that's how I spent. I kind of use that as my background sound.
oh, cool, cool. Well, I don't think not Jeb is going to speak.
That's okay.
So we are coming up on the end of the podcast, and because we're here, and because I take a lesson from the Paul Leslie Hour,
Okay.
we believe in giving the show over to the guest so that he can say what's ever on his mind, knowing that he could be immortalized and his words will be listened to in generations to come. So, with that being said, you may have the floor.
Well, thank you. In some ways, I guess I'm sort of used to this because I'm a professor. Um, from a pedagogical standpoint, I am a dinosaur. I'm very much lecture oriented, but So I'm kind of used to saying things that I hope people will carry out with them. Um, usually it's about, well, it's kind of what got me into being a literature professor anyway. Um, the the late English philosopher Sir Roger Scruton um, was talking about teaching at one point, and he said, "Good teachers love their students. Great teachers love their subject matter." Now, I don't know if I'm a great teacher. I don't think I am. I mean, I do okay. This is my 21st year. I got tenure. I'm a full professor, and nobody's come after me with torches and pitchforks yet. But you know, I might be a great teacher. I might not be, but at the very least, I can aspire to being a great teacher. And what Scruton said about that, yes, I do love my students, but the reason I teach the stuff I teach beyond the basic matters of rent and groceries and that sort of thing, um, is because this stuff that I've read, whether it's medieval morality plays or crime fiction or Samuel Johnson and folks from the Restoration, long 18th century, you know, whatever it is I read, this is stuff that I found beauty in, and I found passion, and I think it's wonderful and it's powerful, and I want to make sure that it lasts at least one more generation. And so, you know, when I'm working with my students, one of the things that I hope they pick up is that, hey, if this guy can get this excited about this stuff, maybe there's something here. And if they pick up on that, then maybe they can maybe Johnson and Chaucer and the anonymous writer that we think of as the Wakefield Master who wrote the Second Shepherd's play, you know, those folks, maybe people will keep thinking about them for a little while longer. As for my own work, my fiction, um, you know, I am by no means arrogant enough to expect any of that to last. That's, but again, that's that's not entirely why I did it. You know, if I make some money time to time off my writing, that's great. But you know, again, once I kind of realized that I didn't have to worry about writing as a career, and I had done enough of that when I was a magazine editor. I was a journalist for 6 years, and um, you know, I made a living as a writer. But now that I don't have to do that anymore, now that I have the freedom to do that, do the things that I want to do, the way I want to do them, if people want to read them, if people want to find out about them, and who knows, maybe somewhere down the line I might wind up being somebody's footnote. Well, that's great. That's more than I expected. It's kind of funny. Yesterday I was talking on social media with some friends in the crime fiction business. We were talking about a writer named Jordan Harper, who he had a book come out last year called Everybody Knows, and he won the Edgar a couple years ago for his book She Rides Shotgun. And he's got a book that hasn't been published in the States yet called The Last King of California that is amazing. Anyway, for my money, I think Jordan may very well be the best crime writer of this generation, my generation. Um, the only other couple of people that I could think of off the top of my head that would be in the same conversation would be Megan Abbott and Sean Cosby. S.A. Cosby is the name he writes under. And anyway, Sean and I were talking about all this, and I said, you well, Sean was talking about, I'm perfectly happy to be the Ross McDonald to Jordan's Raymond Chandler. And I said, well, if you guys are like Ross McDonald and Chandler or Hammett and Chandler, I'm destined to be that one guy. No, not him. The geez, he's standing right there. Yeah, that's who I. That's who I'm. I'll be happy to be that. You know, it, it's funny. I mean, it took me a long time even to think of myself as being a real writer. I joke periodically about having what I call Pinocchio moments when I've been making up these stories and putting them out there in the world. And now when somebody says, "Hey, I read that story, I liked it a lot," or I see my name's on the cover of a book with guys like Stephen King or Joe Lansdale or Lawrence Block or any number of Lee Child, all these folks who are Joyce Carol Oates, all these folks who are legit, you know, big shot writers, and I'm at the party too. You know, it took a long time to kind of think of myself as playing in that league. I'm getting a little bit better at it now, but like I said, I still think of them as Pinocchio moments, and the idea of 50 years from now, somebody, maybe some graduate student somewhere will be trying to write something about crime fiction um, or maybe ekphrastic work, because a lot of my stories have been based on various works of art, including some by my father. If somebody's doing a paper about ekphrastic fiction, and they find out there was this guy Warren Moore who wrote a story about a Hopper painting and a story about a Dolly painting, and this and that and the other thing. Well, even if it's just for a while, even if it's just a very shallow scratch on the wall, that's pretty freaking cool. And I'm not going to make deep cuts in the wall like Chaucer or Johnson or any of the other folks that I teach, but there's a satisfaction in making whatever the little scratches are that I happen to make.
Well, I think that your passion is contagious. You make me want to type and you make me want to teach.
Oh,
So thank you. You certainly affected me. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with me, Warren.
thank you for having me, Robert. This has been a blast.
Thank you. Later.
All right, catch you later. Bye bye.
Bye.